The message arrived on a humid Tuesday morning while Patrice Holt was watering her peace lilies in the soft light of her Atlanta kitchen. Her phone buzzed once, and when she looked at the screen, the numbers seemed unreal. $23 million. For a long moment, she simply stared, water spilling from the can across the windowsill as her mind refused to believe what her eyes were seeing. At 62, after a quiet life teaching English literature at Clark Atlanta University, she had suddenly become a millionaire many times over. The text read, "Ms. Holt, please contact our office immediately regarding the estate of Charles Holt. Time-sensitive documents await your signature. Uncle Charles, Charlie Holt." Her father's eccentric older brother had always been the family's mystery. Brilliant, reclusive, charming in small doses but impossible to know. He was the kind of man who disappeared for years, returning with vague stories about investments and international deals, sending her birthday cards with a crisp 20 tucked inside long after she'd stopped expecting them. 3 weeks ago, he had died at 95. She'd sent flowers, not expecting anything more. Now she understood there had been something much larger behind his silence. Her hands shook as she dialed the number in the message. "This is Patrice Holt." The voice on the other end was calm, precise, practiced. "Ms. Holt, I'm Jonathan Mercer, executor of your uncle's estate. You should have received preliminary documents by email about 30 minutes ago. But before you sign anything, Mr. Holt left specific instructions. Our associate, Julie Bennett, will contact you privately regarding certain sensitive matters." Patrice frowned. "Sensitive matters? I'm not at liberty to elaborate," Mercer said evenly. "Miss Bennett will reach out within 48 hours. Until then, please don't tell anyone about your inheritance." The call ended, leaving her alone in the stillness of her kitchen. Tell no one? That was impossible. There was one person who needed to know, her son Calvin. At 28, Calvin Holt had built a promising career as a financial analyst for the prestigious Westbrook Group. But their relationship had grown strained. He called less, visited rarely, and when he did, his tone carried the polite detachment of someone fulfilling an obligation. The last time they'd spoken 3 months ago, he'd asked for a temporary loan of $5,000. She'd sent it from her retirement fund and never heard another word. But $23 million could change everything. It could heal the distance between them, bring him home, make them a family again. She called immediately. Straight to voicemail. "Calvin, it's Mom. I have incredible news. Call me as soon as you can." She tried again an hour later, then again. When he still didn't respond, she made up her mind. She would drive to his office and tell him in person. Rain began as she merged onto the freeway, heavy drops streaking across her windshield. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the blur of traffic, rehearsing the words she would say when she saw him. How proud Uncle Charlie would be. How this money could help them both start over. She never saw the black SUV until its headlights flared behind her, far too close. It followed tight to her bumper. She slowed. It accelerated. The first bump came soft, almost playful. The second was violent enough to jolt her teeth. The steering wheel spun beneath her hands as the tires lost traction. The SUV swerved alongside her, metal glinting through rain, and with a deliberate turn of its wheel sent her car spinning into the guardrail. Screeching metal, exploding glass, the sickening sensation of weightlessness. Then darkness swallowed everything. When she opened her eyes again, the world smelled of antiseptic and sounded like slow, rhythmic beeping. A doctor hovered above her, voice calm but grave. "Multiple fractures. Internal bleeding. You're lucky to be alive." Days blurred in and out of pain and medication. Each time she woke, she asked the same question. "Has anyone called my son?" On the third day, a kind nurse helped her dial Calvin's number. Her fingers were swollen and wrapped in gauze, her throat raw from the breathing tube. When he answered, his voice was brisk, professional. "Calvin Holt. Calvin, it's me. I've been in an accident. I'm at Mercy General." A long pause. "Mom, I'm heading into a board meeting. Can this wait? I've been here 3 days." It was serious. "I thought you should know." Paper rustled on the other end. "Look, I don't have time or money for drama right now. Things are tight. I'll try to swing by sometime soon." The line went dead. The nurse quietly replaced the phone on the table. Patrice stared at the ceiling, her heart breaking in slow motion. $23 million, and her son couldn't spare 30 minutes. Morphine pulled her back into the dark. But through the haze, one thought began to take shape, a whisper of suspicion she couldn't silence. What if it wasn't an accident? 5 days later, she was strong enough to notice how invisible she'd become, the quiet woman in room 412 who rarely pressed her call button. Her longtime friend, Dr. Teresa Green, a retired biochemist from the same university, visited twice a day. "The police report says you hydroplaned," Teresa said, scrolling through her tablet. "It wasn't," Patrice murmured. "Someone ran me off the road," Teresa looked up sharply. "Are you sure?" "A black SUV. It hit me 3 times." "Did you tell the police?" "They'd think I'm confused. Concussion, pain meds. Too many stories like that. Calvin still hasn't come." "No," Patrice whispered, Teresa's jaw set. "Could it be connected to your inheritance?" "The lawyer said someone named Julie Bennett needs to speak to me." Teresa frowned. "That name sounds familiar." Before she could finish, a man's voice cut through the hallway. "I'm her son. I don't care about visiting hours." Teresa moved instinctively between the door and Patrice's bed, just as Calvin entered. Tailored suit immaculate, cologne sharp, every trace of boyish warmth long gone. "Mother," he said, scanning her bandages. "You look better than I expected." "Considering I almost died, I'd say I'm holding up. I've been swamped. Major acquisition. Bad timing. Timing," she repeated softly. "That's one word for it." Before tension could harden further, a woman stepped into the room behind him, graceful, poised, eyes bright with intelligence. "Hi," she said warmly. "I'm Julie, Calvin's wife." Patrice blinked. "His wife?" "We married 3 months ago," Julie said with an easy smile. "Small ceremony in Barbados. Calvin thought the travel would be too much for you." Another lie she hadn't known existed. But when Julie met her eyes, the woman's expression froze, her skin draining of color as if she'd seen a ghost. "Are you all right?" Patrice asked. Julie's voice trembled. "You look exactly like someone I used to know." Calvin frowned. "Julie, what's going on?" Julie didn't answer. Her gaze stayed locked on Patrice. "You're Patrice Holt, Charles Holt's niece." The air in the room went still. "How do you know my uncle?" Patrice asked carefully. Julie hesitated, then forced a smile. "Your son mentioned him. I'm sorry for your loss." "Mother," Calvin interrupted quickly, "we need to talk about any documents Uncle Charlie might have sent you." The warning from Mercer echoed in her head. "Tell no one." "Nothing," she said smoothly. "Just hospital paperwork." Julie's eyes lingered a second too long, silently saying something Patrice couldn't yet understand. As they turned to go, Julie looked back once more, her face carefully neutral. "It was lovely to meet you, Mrs. Holt." When the door closed, only the monitor's rhythmic beeping filled the silence. Teresa turned toward her. "Patrice," she said quietly, "I think you're in danger." That night, as machines hummed and rain tapped the window, Patrice couldn't shake the image of Julie's stricken face or the sound of that name, Charles Holt. Somehow, her uncle, her son, and this woman were bound together in something far darker than money, and deep in her bones, Patrice knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, painting soft stripes across Patrice Holt's bruised hands. Her body ached with every breath, but her mind was sharper than it had been since the accident. Dr. Teresa Green sat by her bed, reviewing notes on her tablet while nurses rotated quietly in and out of the room. The air smelled of disinfectant and distant coffee. "The police closed the preliminary report," Teresa said finally, her tone unreadable. "They're calling it hydroplaning. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses." Patrice's jaw tightened. "Of course they are." "Convenient conclusion." Teresa lowered her tablet. "If you're right about someone forcing you off the road, that makes this deliberate. We need to tell the police everything." "No," Patrice said quickly. "Not yet. Not until I know who's behind it. You saw the way Calvin looked at me yesterday. He wasn't just surprised. He was afraid. Teresa studied her friend in silence, worry deepening the lines at the corners of her eyes. Then what do you plan to do? Find out what my uncle was hiding, Patrice said softly. That afternoon, a young officer appeared in the doorway, barely old enough to shave, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Officer Daniels, ma'am, he introduced himself. Just need a quick statement for the record. He perched on the edge of a chair, flipping open his notepad. You mentioned another vehicle struck you. Can you describe it again? A black SUV, Patrice said. Tinted windows, no visible plate. It hit me 3 times, deliberately. He frowned slightly but wrote it down. Any reason someone might want to harm you? Not that I can think of, she lied smoothly. She wasn't about to mention the $23 million or the cryptic warning from Attorney Mercer. Daniels closed his notebook. We'll check for cameras, but that stretch of highway's a dead zone. I'll be in touch. When he left, Teresa shook her head. He doesn't believe you? He doesn't have to, Patrice replied. I just need to stay alive long enough to prove I'm right. 2 days later, she was discharged. Teresa insisted on driving her home, fussing over every step from the hospital doors to the curb. Atlanta's early evening traffic moved like a slow, mechanical heartbeat. Brake lights glowing red against the wet pavement. Promise me you'll let me set up security, Teresa said, glancing at her friend in the passenger seat. I'm not helpless, Patrice muttered. You nearly died, Teresa countered. So, humor me. By the time they reached Patrice's quiet Victorian cottage in Decatur, the sun had dipped behind a thick bank of clouds. The little house looked exactly as it had the day she left, except it didn't feel the same. The air seemed disturbed, like someone had been inside and tried too hard to make it look untouched. The security company finished installation this morning, Teresa said, helping her up the porch steps. Cameras at every entrance, motion sensors, direct link to the police, and I hired a home health aide to help you around the house. Woman named Mrs. Abernathy, solid references. Inside, Patrice froze. The watering can still sat on the windowsill, a cup of tea petrified on the side table, her reading glasses folded neatly beside it. Yet something in the air was wrong. Someone's been here, she whispered. That's impossible, Teresa said, though her frown deepened. I had the only spare key. The locks weren't touched. Check my office. While Teresa disappeared down the hall, Patrice lowered herself onto the sofa, heart pounding. When her friend returned, the confirmation was written on her face. Your desk drawers were searched, Teresa said quietly. Everything's back in place but slightly off. Whoever it was knew what they were looking for. Patrice's voice trembled only slightly. They think I already have the documents. Documents? Something my uncle's attorney mentioned. Sensitive matters. Teresa's eyes darkened with understanding. You can't stay here alone. I'll be fine, Patrice insisted. I need to be home. I need to think. Teresa looked like she wanted to argue but knew better. Fine, I'll come back tonight after my shift. Don't open the door for anyone. Promise me, Patrice. I promise. When the front door closed behind her, the silence felt heavier than it should have. The tick of the old grandfather clock echoed like a heartbeat through the hall. At 2:17 p.m., the burner phone Teresa had given her for emergencies vibrated on the coffee table. Patrice picked it up with shaking hands. The message was short. Lakeside Park, East Bench. 4:30 p.m. She read it twice before understanding clicked into place. Julie Bennett. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Abernathy, the home health aide, arrived, a sturdy woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and arms that looked strong enough to lift furniture. After helping Patrice change her bandages, she was startled when Patrice asked to go out. You want to go to the park? Mrs. Abernathy said skeptically, for some fresh air. Doctor's orders, Patrice replied, forcing a weak smile. Mrs. Abernathy sighed. Fine, 20 minutes max, and we're taking the wheelchair. Lakeside Park was 3 blocks away, a quiet stretch of trees and winding paths bordering the water. The late afternoon air was heavy with humidity and the scent of rain. Patrice sat silently as Mrs. Abernathy pushed her along the gravel path. At the far end of the park, a lone figure sat on a bench overlooking the lake. "I'd like to rest here," Patrice said softly. "Could you get us some water from the vendor near the playground?" When Mrs. Abernathy reluctantly left, the figure on the bench rose and walked toward her. Gone was the polished lawyer from the hospital. Julie Bennett now wore jeans, a hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her sunglasses. "We don't have much time," she said quietly, scanning the path. "They're watching your house." "Who's watching me?" Patrice asked, her pulse quickening. "And why are you meeting me like this? What's your real connection to my uncle?" Julie's calm facade cracked. "I'm genuinely Calvin's wife, that part's true. But I'm also the attorney your uncle hired before his death. He asked me to protect you and deliver certain documents." Patrice stared at her, disbelief cutting through the fear. "You married my son as part of your legal work?" Julie's tone sharpened. "No, I met Calvin long before your uncle contacted our firm. But fate has an odd sense of humor, doesn't it?" Patrice's voice lowered. "Then tell me the truth. Why did someone try to kill me?" Julie exhaled slowly, looking out toward the water. "Because they think you have what your uncle left behind, evidence of systematic fraud at Westbrook Group. Your uncle spent years collecting proof, falsified statements, offshore accounts, shell companies. He was preparing to expose them. And Calvin?" Patrice asked, voice trembling. Julie hesitated, then said softly, "He's caught in the middle. I think Westbrook's CEO, Victor Westbrook, has been grooming him, drawing him into transactions he doesn't fully understand. He's in deeper than he knows." "You're defending him," Patrice murmured. "I'm trying to save him," Julie corrected gently. "Your uncle arranged for a courier to deliver his files to you tomorrow. Once you have them, I'll help you bring everything to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Footsteps echoed on the path. Mrs. Abernathy returning. "What about you?" Patrice asked quickly. Julie's jaw tightened. "Once this starts, my career will be over. My marriage, too. But it's the right thing to do, and I care about your son. Despite everything, he deserves a chance to make it right." Then, with one final glance, she walked away, blending into a group of joggers before Mrs. Abernathy appeared, frowning. Who was that? Patrice turned toward the water, watching a heron standing motionless in the shallows. "Just another bird watcher," she said quietly. That night, Patrice couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house, the creak of the floors, the hum of the refrigerator felt magnified. Her thoughts chased themselves in endless circles. 23 million, a deliberate attempt on her life. Her son possibly involved in something criminal. His wife secretly working to protect her. By dawn, the truth had settled in her chest. Like a stone, she was standing at the center of a storm that had already claimed one life. And the next strike would be hers if she wasn't careful. By mid-morning, the rain had thinned into a silver mist that clung to the windows of Patrice Holt's cottage, softening the view of the quiet Decatur street. She sat by the bay window in her reading chair, pretending to read Pride and Prejudice while her eyes drifted constantly to the world outside. Every car that passed, every shadow that flickered across the driveway, sent a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Mrs. Abernathy moved about the house with professional precision, tidying, checking medications, muttering about soup, but Patrice could tell the woman was watching her too closely. Whether out of concern or suspicion, she couldn't tell anymore. The memory of Julie's words at the park looped through her mind. "They're watching your house." At exactly 11:17 a.m., the low rumble of a delivery truck broke the silence. It slowed, stopped directly in front of her house, and a young courier stepped out, mid-20s, beard, wearing a plain brown uniform. He carried a medium-sized package under one arm. Patrice's pulse quickened. Mrs. Abernathy answered the door, signing for it with practiced ease. "From Mercer and Associates," she read aloud before setting it gently beside Patrice's chair. "Thank you," Patrice said, forcing a calm smile. "I'll open it later." The aide nodded and went to the kitchen. Patrice waited, heart thudding, until she heard the faint clatter of dishes before she reached for the box. It was heavier than expected, professionally sealed, bearing Mercer's embossed logo in the corner. She hesitated, then hid it beneath the afghan draped over her lap just as the phone rang. "Mother," Calvin's voice came through, tight and urgent. "I need to see you today." "I'm still recovering," she said cautiously. "The doctor recommends limited visits." "This is important," he insisted. "It's about Uncle Charlie." A chill slid down her spine. "What about him?" "Not over the phone. I'll be there at 2. The line went dead. She stared at the silent receiver, then at the hidden box. 2 hours. 2 hours before her son, perhaps an ally, perhaps something else entirely, walked through her door. She had to know what was inside. When Mrs. Abernathy brought her lunch tray, Patrice made a show of taking her pain medication, slipping the pills into her napkin the moment the woman turned away. "Could you bring me my blue cardigan from the closet?" she asked sweetly. "I'm chilled." The moment Abernathy's footsteps faded down the hall, Patrice snatched up the package and shuffled toward the grandfather clock in the corner, a relic that had belonged to her father. The hollow cavity beneath its pendulum had hidden love letters, jewelry, even her will at one point. Now it would hide something far more dangerous. She slid the box inside, shut the panel, and was back in her chair by the time Abernathy returned. "Thank you," Patrice said, feigning drowsiness. "These pills make me sleepy." "I'll rest now," the woman nodded approvingly. "I'll be in the kitchen." Patrice waited another full minute, then rose, each movement a knife of pain through her healing ribs. She retrieved the box from its hiding place and made her slow, painful way to the bathroom, the one place in the house she could lock without question. Sitting on the closed toilet lid, she opened the package with trembling hands. Inside lay a thick manila envelope, a sealed letter addressed in Uncle Charlie's unmistakable slanted handwriting, and a small flash drive taped to the side. She opened the letter first. "My dear Patrice, if you are reading this, I am gone, and danger is already circling you." Inside the sealed envelope is evidence of criminal activity at Westbrook Group: fraud, bribery, offshore accounts. This information will destroy careers and expose powerful men. It may also destroy your son. Calvin was recruited by Victor Westbrook to act as leverage when I began investigating. He may be complicit in ways he doesn't fully understand. Trust Julie Bennett. She is the only person with the knowledge and courage to finish what I began. The decision of how to proceed is now yours. With love, Uncle Charlie. Patrice pressed the paper to her chest, her eyes burning. The edges of her world tilted. She had wanted the truth, but not this truth. Not one that made her son's hands part of the machine that had nearly killed her. She wiped her eyes, then opened the envelope. Inside were pages of financial statements, offshore transfers, forged contracts, photographs of board meetings in expensive hotels. She didn't need a degree in accounting to recognize corruption. Even a mother's eye could see guilt. And there, her breath caught, were several photographs of Calvin himself, shaking hands with men she didn't recognize, handing over envelopes, his face pale and drawn. "Dear God," she whispered. A knock at the bathroom door startled her so violently she almost dropped the files. "Miss Holt?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice was close, polite but probing. "Are you all right? You've been in there a long time." "I'm fine," Patrice called, trying to steady her breathing. "Just a moment." She stuffed the papers back into the envelope and hid everything under her robe. When she opened the door, Mrs. Abernathy's sharp eyes went straight to the bundle in her arms. "Let me help you with that," the woman offered. "No need," Patrice said lightly. "Just some old photographs I want to show my son." Abernathy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Your son called. He's running early. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Patrice froze. 20 minutes. She had no time to think. "Thank you," she said, moving past her, her mind racing. Back in her bedroom, she locked the door and leaned against it, trying to breathe. The clock downstairs chimed 1:30. She had less than half an hour to hide the evidence again. Somewhere no one, especially Calvin, would think to look. She pulled open her vanity drawer, removing a small key she hadn't touched in years. It opened a hidden compartment beneath the drawer, a space that had once held love letters from her late husband, and, later, the mammogram report she couldn't bear to show her son. Now, trembling, she slid the manila envelope inside and locked it shut. She'd barely replaced the drawer when a car door slammed outside. She peeked through the curtains. A black SUV idled at the curb, its tinted windows facing her house like a dark, unblinking eye. Her heartbeat thudded in her throat. Two silhouettes moved inside. One of them turned toward her window and pointed. Panic surged. She dropped the curtain, forcing herself to move, to think, to breathe. She had just enough time to regain composure when Mrs. Abernathy knocked. "Your son is here," she announced. "And he brought someone with him." Patrice's stomach dropped. She already knew who it would be. A few minutes later, Calvin stood in her living room, wearing the same suit as the day before, though his composure was slipping. Beside him stood a man built like a wall, tall, broad, with cold blue-gray eyes and the rigid posture of military training. "Mother," Calvin said, his voice overly bright. "You're looking well." "Considering I was nearly killed, I'm feeling marvelous," she said, lowering herself carefully into her armchair. Her gaze shifted to the stranger. "And you are?" "Marcus Fisher," the man said smoothly. "Mr. Westbrook's head of security. I'm here to ensure this discussion goes smoothly." "How thoughtful," Patrice replied dryly. "And what exactly are we ensuring goes smoothly?" Calvin glanced at Fisher, who gave the faintest nod. "Uncle Charlie may have sent you materials that could be misinterpreted," Calvin began, pacing the floor. "Misinterpreted?" Patrice's voice was soft but razor-edged. "Interesting choice of word," Fisher spoke up, tone even but threateningly polite. Mr. Holt was confused in his final years. He made wild accusations against respected financial institutions, including your son's employer. Patrice's eyes locked on Calvin. "You believe that?" Calvin hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Mother, please. If Uncle Charlie sent you anything, it could be dangerous. Those people, concerning enough to run me off the road?" she asked quietly. The words hung like a blade. Fisher's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Calvin turned toward him sharply. "You said it was an accident." Fisher's voice was calm. "The police report confirmed hydroplaning." "Because that's what they were told," Patrice said. "No witnesses, no cameras." "Convenient, wouldn't you say?" A tense silence followed. Even Mrs. Abernathy, standing in the doorway with her phone in hand, looked uncertain whose side she was on. Calvin sank onto the sofa, his shoulders slumped. "Mother, please. If you have anything, give it to me, for your own safety." "My safety?" she repeated softly. "Now that's an interesting concern coming from you." Fisher stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore had powerful enemies. They might assume his heir inherited more than money. "It's best for everyone if any sensitive materials are returned immediately." The veiled threat hung heavy in the air. Patrice's eyes hardened. "Calvin," she said, her tone suddenly cool and commanding, "we need to talk alone." "That's not advisable," Fisher interjected. "It wasn't a suggestion," she said. "Either you wait outside or I call the police and report suspicious men on my property." "Your choice." For a moment, no one moved. Then Calvin turned to the security man, voice low but firm. "Wait in the car, Marcus. This is my mother." Fisher hesitated, clearly torn between orders and loyalty, but finally nodded. 15 minutes, he said before stepping outside. As the door shut, Mrs. Abernathy appeared again. "Shall I make tea?" "That would be lovely," Patrice said. "Earl Grey. And take your time with it, will you?" "It's better when it steeps." Their eyes met. Mrs. Abernathy understood. "Of course, Miss Holt. 20 minutes minimum." When she disappeared into the kitchen, Calvin finally exhaled and dropped the mask. "You have no idea what you're caught in," he whispered, his voice breaking. Patrice met his gaze, her tone soft but steady. "Then explain it to me, son. Tell me how you ended up working for the people who tried to kill your mother." For a long moment, Calvin Holt stood in silence. staring at the floor like a man trying to summon courage from somewhere deep beneath his shame. The confident executive facade had fallen away. What stood before Patrice was her son, haunted, fragile, cornered. "I didn't know about the accident," he said finally, his voice cracking. "I swear to you, Mother, I didn't. Victor told me you were being watched for your own protection because Uncle Charlie had started something dangerous. He said people might target you to get to him." Patrice's gaze didn't soften. "And you believed that?" "I wanted to," Calvin admitted, sinking onto the edge of the couch. "Westbrook isn't just a company. It's an empire. Victor controls everything. Politicians, regulators, even law enforcement. He said Uncle Charlie was unstable, paranoid, accusing people of things he couldn't prove." Patrice leaned forward, pain flashing through her ribs, but her voice was steady. "Uncle Charlie wasn't paranoid. He was brilliant. And he found proof. That's why they killed him, and why they tried to kill me." Calvin's shoulders slumped. "I didn't know, I swear it. When I joined Westbrook, I thought it was legitimate. Victor said I'd learn more by working under him, that I'd be his protege. I wanted to make you proud, but by the time I realized what he was really doing, it was too late." "What exactly is he doing?" "Fraud," Calvin said bitterly, "on a scale you can't imagine. Moving money through offshore accounts, falsifying quarterly reports, creating fake shell companies to show investors phantom profits. I've helped manipulate data, signed off on transactions I didn't understand. If anyone finds out, I'm finished. Federal prison finished." Patrice closed her eyes for a second, grief and disbelief colliding in her chest. When she opened them, her voice trembled with restrained fury. "And still you brought his security into my house." Calvin's throat worked as he swallowed. "I didn't have a choice. Victor suspects you have Charlie's files. He told me to retrieve anything you might have received before the investigation team gets there. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd destroy me, professionally, financially, everything." "So you came here to steal from me?" "No," Calvin said quickly. "To warn you. I told Fisher we'd talk privately because I knew he'd report back to Victor, and I needed to know if you really had them." "Please tell me you don't. Tell me you didn't open anything." Patrice studied him carefully. "And if I did?" He looked at her with pure fear. "Then you need to hide them now, because Victor won't stop. He's already had people following you, people worse than Fisher, people who drive black SUVs." Calvin's face went pale. "You saw them?" "They nearly killed me," she said, her voice dropping into a whisper. "Does that sound like protection?" He pressed his hands over his eyes. "Oh, God." The sound of the kettle whistling in the kitchen broke the tension for an instant, but neither of them moved. When Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway moments later, balancing a tray with shaking hands, she sensed the heaviness in the air. "I'll leave this here," she murmured, setting the tea down. "Take your time, Miss Holt." As she turned to go, Patrice caught her eye. There was no fear in the woman's face now, only grim readiness. When they were alone again, Patrice spoke quietly. "You have to choose, Calvin. You can keep protecting that man or you can save yourself." "But you can't do both. I can't just walk away," he said. "He knows everything about me. Every transaction, every personal detail. He'd destroy me before I got 2 steps out the door." "Then help me destroy him first," Patrice said. He looked up sharply. "You don't understand. The moment Victor senses you're not under control, he'll come after you again. And this time he won't miss." "Then let him try," she said evenly. "I've already died once. I won't live the rest of my life afraid." Before Calvin could respond, the front gate buzzer rang. Both of them froze. "Who's that?" he whispered. Patrice motioned toward the window. Through the slats of the blinds, she saw a black SUV idling across the street, the same one from earlier. 2 men stepped out, their suits too sharp, their movements too coordinated to be random visitors. Calvin cursed under his breath. "He sent them here already. I told him I needed time." "Then you better make that time count," Patrice said, standing with effort. He moved toward the door, but she caught his wrist. "No, let me talk to them." He stared at her in disbelief. "Mother, trust me," she said. If I'm the heir to $23 million, I can at least pretend to be someone worth negotiating with. Fisher's voice called from outside, calm and deep. Mr. Holt, is everything all right? Patrice took a slow breath, straightened her cardigan, and opened the door halfway. Everything's fine, Mr. Fisher. My son and I are simply finishing our conversation. The man's cold blue eyes flicked past her into the house. Good, because Mr. Westbrook would hate to think there was a misunderstanding. Patrice met his stare without flinching. Tell Victor he'll get what's his. When I'm good and ready. A long pause. Then Fisher smiled faintly, a gesture without warmth. Understood, ma'am. We'll be nearby if you need anything. As the SUV door shut and the engine rumbled away, Calvin exhaled shakily. You shouldn't have provoked him. I didn't, Patrice said, sinking back into her chair. I just made sure he knows I'm not afraid. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years, and something inside him seemed to shift. You're stronger than I remember, he said quietly. She gave a tired, bittersweet smile. You just forgot who raised you. For a while they sat in silence, the sound of rain beginning again outside. Then Calvin straightened, his voice low but firm. If you're serious about fighting back, there's someone who can help. Julie. She's not just a lawyer. She's a whistleblower attorney. She's been building a case against Westbrook for years. If we can get her the evidence, she can bring Victor down. Patrice nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll do. Tomorrow we meet her. But tonight, we make sure those documents stay hidden. Calvin hesitated, glancing toward the darkened window. You don't trust Mrs. Abernathy? I trust no one until this is over, Patrice said. Not anymore. Outside, the thunder rolled closer, low and steady like the growl of something waking. Somewhere in the distance, the black SUV idled again, waiting. Inside, a mother and her son sat side by side for the first time in years, bound not by affection, but by a dangerous truth neither could escape. The storm lasted through the night, thunder rumbling across Atlanta's dark sky like a warning from above. Patrice Holt barely slept. Each crack of lightning illuminated the walls of her bedroom, flashing across the mirror, the wardrobe, the vanity that now concealed the most dangerous collection of papers she'd ever held. By dawn, exhaustion and adrenaline had fused into one steady current of determination. She brewed coffee, her movements slow and deliberate, every creak of the floorboards making her listen for something, or someone, outside. When Calvin emerged from the guest room, the shadows under his eyes spoke of a night spent wrestling with guilt and fear. He loosened his tie, the gesture more habit than necessity. I didn't think I'd ever see this house again, he said quietly. It feels smaller than I remember. It's the fear that makes everything shrink, Patrice replied. He gave a hollow laugh. And the lies that fill up the space, she didn't answer. Instead, she opened the envelope she had retrieved from the vanity's hidden compartment and laid it on the kitchen table. Inside were USB drives, handwritten notes, and a single letterhead page bearing Westbrook Group's logo. Your uncle died for this, she said. We're not letting his death be meaningless. Calvin sat, rubbing his temples. Julie can help us get this to the Securities and Exchange Commission. She has a contact there, someone who already suspects Westbrook of fraud. But we can't just walk into her office. Victor has her under surveillance. How do you know that? Patrice asked. I've seen the reports, he said grimly. They're tracking her phone, her movements, even her bank transactions. She's been pretending to stay loyal while secretly building her case. But now Victor's getting suspicious. Patrice nodded slowly. Then we meet somewhere he can't control. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone and typed a message into a secure chat app before showing her the screen. Riverside Park. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring no devices. Only truth. She sent this last night, Calvin said. She's expecting me to bring you. Patrice studied the message. And if it's a trap? Then we'll know who Victor really trusts, he said. By mid-morning, Dr. Teresa Green stopped by on her way to the hospital, carrying a thermos of soup and her usual worried expression. You look pale, she said, scanning Patrice with practiced precision. And that son of yours looks like he's seen a ghost, Maybe he has, Patrice said quietly. Teresa, I need a favor, Teresa frowned. What kind of favor? I need you to hold something for me. Somewhere safe, where no one can access it without your permission. Teresa's brows knit. Patrice, you're scaring me. Good, Patrice said. That means you understand. Reluctantly, Teresa took the envelope Patrice handed her, weighing it in her hands. What is this? Insurance, Patrice replied. If anything happens to me or Calvin, give it to the authorities. All of it. Teresa didn't argue, though her lips pressed into a thin line. You always were stubborn, she murmured. You'd go through fire before asking for help. I've already been through it, Patrice said softly. Now I'm just trying not to burn again. That afternoon, while Mrs. Abernathy made her usual rounds in the kitchen, Patrice used Calvin's laptop to research Victor Westbrook. The internet painted him as a titan of industry, charitable, disciplined, a self-made billionaire with a reputation for clean business. But Patrice knew now what hid behind that smile. Offshore accounts, bribery, blackmail. Her uncle's letters detailed them all. She scrolled through news photos of Victor standing beside political figures, shaking hands with regulators, smiling beside Calvin at a Westbrook charity gala. The image made her stomach twist. Her son, dressed in a tuxedo, looking every bit the prodigy Victor had groomed, stood beside the man who had ordered her death. When the front door creaked open, she jumped. It was Helen, Teresa's friend, a former Army nurse whom Teresa had sent to check on her. Security consultant, Helen introduced herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She moved with quiet confidence, her gaze sweeping the room. Dr. Green told me you've been having unwanted visitors. Mind if I take a look around? Patrice gestured for her to go ahead. Within minutes, Helen had checked the doors, the windows, the motion sensors, and the blind spots outside. When she returned, her tone was serious. You've got a car parked half a block down that's been there since last night. Tinted windows. 2 men inside. Patrice's blood ran cold. The same SUV? Helen nodded. Either that or its twin. Calvin appeared from the hallway, alarm flashing across his face. They're watching again. Then we make them watch the wrong thing, Helen said. You two are planning something, aren't you? Calvin hesitated, but Patrice stepped forward. We're meeting someone tomorrow. Someone who can help end this. Helen's eyes narrowed. Then tonight we make sure those files don't stay here. They'll search this place the minute you leave. Where can we move them? Calvin asked. Helen thought for a moment, then nodded toward the back door. There's a drainage culvert behind your property. Connects to the main city system. If we package the evidence waterproof and drop it there, no one will find it. My contact at APD can retrieve it quietly and hand it over to the right people. Patrice hesitated. It's risky. Everything about this is risky, Helen said. But better the risk you control than the one coming for you. They spent the next hour preparing. Calvin printed decoy paperwork to replace the originals. Patrice sealed the true documents in a heavy-duty freezer bag Helen had brought, double wrapping it with duct tape. As they worked, lightning flared again outside, illuminating their faces in harsh flashes. When everything was ready, Helen gave them each a burner phone. If anything happens, call this number. It connects directly to Dr. Green and my line. No one else will trace it. Before leaving, she turned to Patrice. Tomorrow morning, Riverside Park. You go in separately, no electronics. If anyone follows, we'll spot them first. Patrice nodded, exhausted but resolute. And if something goes wrong? Helen smiled faintly. Then we improvise. As the rain intensified, she slipped out the back door into the darkness, carrying the sealed bag under her coat. Through the curtain, Patrice watched her cross the yard, open the culvert grate, and disappear into the storm. Moments later, the headlights of the waiting SUV flickered. The men inside were talking on their radios, glancing toward the house. They know she's gone, Calvin whispered. Then let them wonder, Patrice said. For once, we're ahead. They watched as Helen reappeared, drenched but smiling, the rain slicking her short hair to her forehead. It's done, she said simply. The evidence is safe. Patrice nodded slowly, feeling the first real surge of hope since the nightmare began. That night, as thunder rolled low over the city, mother and son sat in the dim light of the living room. Between them, untouched cups of tea cooled on the table. Calvin stared at his hands, then at her. "I can't promise this will fix everything," he said quietly. "Even if we take Victor down, I'll still have to face what I did." Patrice reached over, placing her hand on his. "Facing it is how you fix it." Outside, rain lashed against the windows, but inside the storm had changed. For the first time, it wasn't just fear moving through the house. It was resolve. Tomorrow, they would face Victor Westbrook, Julie Bennett, and the truth, and only one of them would walk away untarnished. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with mist. The city of Atlanta still wrapped in the remnants of the night's storm. Patrice Holt dressed slowly, each movement deliberate. Black slacks, cream blouse, her late husband's gold bracelet around her wrist for courage. She studied her reflection in the mirror, the bruises fading, but the determination in her eyes stronger than ever. Calvin waited downstairs. Pacing the length of the living room, his phone turned off and battery removed just as Helen instructed. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw tight. The nervous energy in him buzzed like an exposed wire. "Julie texted last night, short message, come alone. They'll be watching. She's taking a huge risk meeting us in public." Patrice buttoned her coat, her voice steady. "Then we'll make sure her risk is worth it." Outside, the morning air carried a damp chill. Helen stood near the car, dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket, blending easily into the early traffic. "Two tails on the block," she said quietly as Patrice approached. Black SUV 1 street over, silver sedan half a mile back. "They're not subtle." Patrice glanced toward the end of the street, spotting the vague shape of tinted glass catching light. "Victor's people. Most likely," Helen said. "You take the south entrance to Riverside Park. Calvin goes through the west. I'll circle from the parking lot with Teresa's nephew. He's APD off duty. If anything feels wrong, you get to the north exit and keep walking. Don't look back." Patrice nodded. "And you?" Helen smiled faintly. "I'm the distraction, remember?" Within minutes, they were gone. 3 cars pulling away in different directions, merging into the morning rush hour. Riverside Park sprawled along the Chattahoochee River, a stretch of green bordered by winding paths and tall oaks dripping with rain. The ground was soft underfoot, the air thick with the smell of wet grass and pine. Patrice walked slowly down the southern trail, hands in her coat pockets, her heart a measured drumbeat. Birds flitted in the trees above, their calls distant against the low hum of the city beyond. She passed joggers, an old man walking a dog, a couple sharing coffee on a bench, every face she studied. Every glance she read, then she saw her Julie Bennett stood by the water's edge, wearing a long tan trench coat and oversized sunglasses, her hair hidden beneath a scarf. The wind tugged at the fabric, revealing a face pale with fatigue but sharp with purpose. "Mrs. Holt?" she greeted softly, her eyes scanning the path behind Patrice. "You came." "I almost didn't," Patrice admitted. "But you're the only one I trust less than the people trying to kill me, and that's saying something." Julie's lips curved into a weary smile. "Fair. Do you have the evidence?" "Not on me," Patrice said evenly. "It's safe." Julie exhaled, relief flickering in her eyes. "Good. The SEC contact is ready to move as soon as we confirm the data." "But there's something you need to know first. Victor knows about me." Patrice's pulse quickened. "How?" "He's been intercepting internal emails for months," Julie said. "He doesn't know I'm working directly with the SEC yet, but he suspects. He's desperate, cornered, and when powerful men get desperate, people die." The words hit like cold water. Julie pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it over. "That's a list of every shell company tied to Westbrook's laundering operations. Your uncle had most of it, but I found the missing link, the offshore trust in Belize. That's where the stolen investor money went." Patrice scanned the paper. "And this proves everything?" "It's enough to start a criminal case," Julie said. "But we still need the original flash drive. Without that, it's your word against Victor's." I can get it, Patrice said. It's not far. Julie nodded. We'll meet again this evening, same park near the bridge entrance. Once I get the drive, I'll hand everything to my contact. Before Patrice could respond, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Julie's head snapped toward the tree line, her body going rigid. From behind the oaks, 2 men appeared, dark suits, earpieces glinting. Julie's voice dropped to a whisper. Run! Patrice's feet froze. What about you? I'll hold them, Julie said, pushing the paper back into Patrice's hand. Go now! But before Patrice could move, a black SUV screeched to a halt on the path, mud spraying in all directions. Marcus Fisher stepped out, expression calm and lethal. Mrs. Holt, he said evenly, Mr. Westbrook would like a word. Julie moved fast, pulling Patrice behind her. Get to the bridge! Don't make this harder than it has to be, Fisher warned, his hand slipping beneath his jacket. A single gunshot cracked through the park, then chaos erupted. Screams scattered the morning calm as joggers ducked and ran. Patrice's body reacted before her mind did, her legs pumping across the wet grass as Fisher barked orders. Julie stayed behind her, firing a small pistol she'd drawn from her coat. Go, Patrice, she shouted. Keep moving! Patrice sprinted toward the bridge, her lungs burning. She didn't dare look back until she reached the railing. When she did, she saw Julie pinned behind a stone wall, trading fire with Fisher's men. One of them fell. Another advanced. Then Helen appeared from the parking lot, moving low and fast, her own weapon drawn. She fired once, twice, clean, professional. The men scattered. Fisher dove for cover, blood streaking down his sleeve. Over here, Helen yelled. Patrice ran to her, nearly collapsing as Helen caught her by the arm. You okay? Julie, Patrice gasped. She's still... Before she could finish, a final gunshot split the air, sharper than the others. Julie staggered forward, clutching her shoulder, then collapsed onto the wet grass. Get her! Helen ordered Calvin, who had just arrived from the Western Trail, breathless and wild-eyed. He sprinted toward Julie as Fisher's SUV roared back to life, speeding toward the park exit. Helen fired again, hitting the front tire. The SUV fishtailed, slammed into a tree, and stopped smoking. When Calvin reached Julie, she was still conscious but pale. You're hit, he said, pressing a hand to her wound. She gave a weak laugh. Guess I should have charged more for legal services. Patrice knelt beside her, trembling. You saved my life. Julie's hand tightened around hers. Then don't waste it. The flash drive. Keep it safe until tonight. Victor will move fast now. You have one chance to finish this. Her eyes fluttered closed as paramedics and police sirens grew louder in the distance. Helen leaned close to Patrice. We need to disappear before they start asking questions. If Fisher's men are here, Victor's already covering his tracks. Patrice nodded, numb. I know where to go. As the sirens wailed, they slipped away through the trees toward Helen's car, vanishing into the thick Atlanta rain. That night, while the city churned with rumors of a shootout at Riverside Park, Victor Westbrook sat in his glass tower, staring at a shattered phone screen. The image frozen there showed Patrice Holt, alive, running, defiant, his jaw clenched. If she wants to play war, he said softly, then I'll bring the fire. And somewhere across town, in a dimly lit safe house, Patrice looked out at the storm through the cracked window and whispered to herself, then let it burn. The safe house was small and windowless, buried behind an auto repair shop on the outskirts of Atlanta. The faint hum of generators filled the air, masking every sound beyond the thin walls. Inside, Patrice Holt, Calvin, and Helen sat around a battered wooden table lit by a single desk lamp. The room smelled faintly of oil, metal, and rain-soaked pavement. Julie had been taken to the hospital under police protection. Dr. Teresa Green had called 20 minutes earlier to confirm she was alive, stable, and insisting on speaking to Mrs. Holt the moment she woke up. But for now, all they could do was wait. Calvin paced in tight circles, his hands fidgeting at his sides. She risked everything for us. Victor won't let her live long enough to testify. Helen leaned against the wall, arms folded. That's why we're not waiting for the courts. We end this tonight. Patrice looked up, her tired eyes reflecting the lamplight. We have the flash drive. What happens next depends on what's inside. Helen pulled out a laptop from her duffel and placed it on the table. No internet connection, no tracking, no leaks. Let's see what your uncle died protecting. Patrice retrieved the small silver drive from the chain around her neck and handed it over. Helen plugged it in, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of encrypted files appeared on the screen. Folders labeled Aurora, Haven Trust, Cypress Holdings, each one leading to a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell companies, and internal communications. Calvin leaned in closer. Oh my God, this is everything. Emails from Victor himself, bank transfers, even payouts to politicians. Helen clicked open a folder labeled Confidential, Board. A series of scanned letters appeared, each signed by Victor Westbrook, authorizing wire transfers to Cayman Island accounts. But it was the last document that froze all three of them. It was a contract. Recipient, Calvin Holt. Amount, $4.5 million memo. Consulting compensation, executive partnership. 2023, Calvin went pale. That's not real. I never saw that. Patrice's voice was low and steady. It doesn't matter if you saw it. It exists. Victor's been building a paper trail to make you his scapegoat. Calvin stared at the screen in horror. He's setting me up. When the investigation breaks, all that money will point to me. Helen nodded grimly. He's cleaning house. If this goes public without context, you'll look like the insider. That's why we need the full data dump. Emails, recordings, the timestamp logs. Once we prove Victor engineered the transactions, you're clear. Patrice straightened. Then we release it all. Every file, every name. Helen's brow furrowed. You don't understand. This isn't just corporate corruption. It's a criminal network tied to people in law enforcement, banking, and politics. We can't dump it online. We need it in the hands of someone powerful enough to survive the fallout. Julie mentioned a contact at the SEC, Calvin said. Can we reach them? Before Helen could answer, the power flickered. Once, twice. Then the lights died completely, plunging the room into darkness. The hum of the generator outside stopped. Stay quiet, Helen whispered. Through the silence, they heard the faint crunch of gravel outside the door, the slow metallic squeal of the back gate swinging open. Helen drew her sidearm, signaling them to stay down. Emergency exits behind the shelves. Go now. Calvin grabbed his mother's arm and pulled her toward the narrow passage, but Patrice stopped him. The flash drive, she whispered. Helen yanked it from the laptop, shoved it into Patrice's hand, and mouthed, Run! They slipped through the small back corridor, heartbeats thundering in their ears. The air was cold and damp, smelling of oil and rust. As they reached the alley, two shadows appeared at the far end. Men in dark jackets, radios crackling faintly. Calvin froze. We're boxed in. Helen aimed her weapon toward the front, eyes narrowed. We'll make a way out. A flashbang detonated without warning. The world exploded in white light and deafening sound. Patrice hit the ground, disoriented, her ears ringing as shadows moved through the smoke. Someone grabbed her arm. A voice she barely recognized hissed, Move! It was Dr. Teresa Green, wearing a raincoat, her face pale but resolute. She helped Patrice to her feet, guiding her through the haze toward the rear exit of the alley. Julie called me. She said they'd traced you here. The police are minutes behind. Behind them, Helen and Calvin were trading shots with the approaching men. The staccato rhythm of gunfire echoed through the rain. Patrice stumbled, clutching Teresa's arm. We can't leave them. They'll follow, Teresa said. Move. They emerged onto a deserted street, sprinting toward Teresa's car. The rain had begun again, pounding the pavement like nails. As they climbed inside, Patrice saw Helen's silhouette burst from the alley with Calvin close behind, both ducking as bullets sparked off the brick walls. Helen fired one last shot before sliding across the hood of the car and yanking open the passenger door. Drive! Teresa slammed her foot on the gas. The tires screeched as they sped off into the wet Atlanta streets. the black SUVs vanishing behind a curtain of rain. 15 minutes later, they reached a nondescript warehouse near the industrial district, one of Teresa's old university research properties, now unused and forgotten. The heavy door clanged shut behind them as everyone caught their breath. Helen checked her weapon, shaking her head. That was a setup. They cut the power to flush us out. Someone on Julie's team must have leaked the safe house location. Calvin rubbed his temples. If Victor knew where we were, he knows we have the flash drive. He'll double down now. Patrice looked at the device still clutched in her hand. Then we can't hide anymore. We go to the press, the SEC, the FBI, anyone who'll listen. Helen hesitated. It's not that simple. Once this goes public, you'll have targets on your backs. And Victor will have the resources to turn the entire system against you. Teresa stepped forward. What if we don't go through the system? I know someone, a federal contact who owes me a favor. He's not corrupt. He can make sure this reaches Washington without passing through local channels. Can we trust him? Patrice asked. Teresa met her gaze. I've known him 20 years. He's clean. Helen nodded. Then we move now. Before Victor realizes we're still breathing. Calvin looked between them, jaw set. What about Julie? Teresa exhaled. She's alive, but she's under armed guard at Mercy General. Victor will try to finish what he started. Patrice's voice hardened. Then we get her out first. No one else dies for this. At that same moment, across the city, Victor Westbrook stood in his penthouse office overlooking the skyline. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, perfectly composed, utterly calm. Fisher, his arm bandaged, stood nearby, face pale from blood loss. She's still alive, Fisher said. The son, too. They've gone underground. Victor poured himself a drink, swirling the amber liquid with a faint smile. Good, let them run. A cornered mouse is easier to catch. He turned to the window, watching lightning crawl across the clouds. By tomorrow morning, I want both of them gone. And if Bennett talks again, make sure she never leaves that hospital. Fisher nodded, pulling out his phone. Understood. As he left, Victor raised his glass toward the city. To loyalty, he murmured, and to the fools who mistake it for love. In the warehouse, Patrice sat beside her son, staring at the flickering lamplight. Exhaustion tugged at her, but beneath it burned something stronger, purpose. They think we're running, she said quietly. But we're not. Tomorrow we go back to finish this. We expose him on his own stage. Calvin met her gaze, his expression somber but resolute. Then let's end it where it started. Outside, thunder rolled again, shaking the old warehouse as the rain poured harder. The final act had begun. Night had settled heavy over Atlanta, the city pulsing with the restless hum of traffic and rain. In the industrial warehouse, the air smelled faintly of engine oil and electricity. Patrice Holt, Calvin, Helen, and Dr. Teresa Green huddled around a table littered with coffee cups, blueprints, and hastily scribbled notes. The plan was simple in theory, but reckless in execution. Infiltrate Mercy General Hospital, extract Julie Bennett before Victor Westbrook's men silenced her, and deliver the flash drive and supporting evidence to Teresa's contact at the FBI's Atlanta field office. Patrice sat straight-backed, her calm almost eerie amid the tension. Julie saved my life. We don't leave her behind. Helen adjusted her holster, her tone dry. You realize we're about to walk into a hospital swarming with armed security and police who probably answer to Victor? Patrice looked her dead in the eye. I've survived worse. Calvin spread out a map of the hospital, marking the main and service entrances. Julie's in the critical care ward, room 411, guarded by 2 plainclothes agents from a private firm Westbrook Funds. There's a maintenance tunnel under the north wing that connects to the loading dock. We get in through there, Teresa added. I called ahead posing as a medical consultant. I'm expected at the lab entrance at 9 p.m. That gives you an entry window. Once you reach Julie, I'll trigger a fire alarm to clear the lower floors. That's your exit signal, Helen smirked. You've done this before. Teresa's lips curved faintly. You'd be surprised what a university grant proposal teaches you about stealth. By 8:45, the rain had turned into a cold drizzle that slicked every streetlight and windshield. The city's heartbeat slowed as Patrice and Calvin slipped into the shadows near the hospital's loading bay, dressed in stolen paramedic jackets Helen had secured. Their badges read Trauma Response Unit. Helen crouched by the service door, working the lock with practiced ease. Once you're inside, you'll have 5 minutes before security checks the camera feed. Make it count. The latch clicked open. She motioned them through. The maintenance tunnel beyond was narrow and dimly lit, pipes running along the ceiling, the air damp and metallic. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved, the silence between them heavy with everything unspoken. Fear. Guilt, love, Mom, Calvin whispered. If we don't make it, don't, Patrice said sharply. We're making it. They reached a steel door marked Staff Access Only. Calvin swiped the stolen badge, and the lock buzzed open. They emerged into a sterile corridor, the hum of machines and faint smell of antiseptic pressing around them. Patrice pulled a surgical mask over her face, tucking her curls beneath the paramedic cap. Room 411, she whispered. They moved quickly but calmly, blending with the flow of nurses and orderlies. The elevator dinged softly as they stepped inside, hearts pounding in sync. The ride to the 4th floor felt endless. When the doors slid open, the hallway was eerily quiet. 2 men stood outside Julie's room, broad-shouldered, alert, hands near their jackets. Calvin's pulse quickened. That's them, Patrice's eyes hardened. Then let's improvise. She straightened her posture, pulling a clipboard from the supply cart beside the elevator. With an air of authority that came naturally to a woman who had taught university students for 30 years, she strode forward. Excuse me, she said briskly. Radiology sent us. We're here for a mobile scan on patient Bennett. Doctor's orders, one of the guards frowned. We weren't notified. Patrice didn't blink. That's because the order came directly from Chief Medical Officer Hawkins. And if you want to explain to him why his schedule's being delayed, be my guest. The men exchanged uncertain looks. Make it quick, one said finally, stepping aside. Patrice and Calvin entered the room. Julie lay pale but conscious, her arm bandaged, her breathing shallow but steady. The moment she saw them, relief flooded her face. You're insane, she whispered hoarsely. But thank God you're here. Patrice closed the door behind them. We don't have long. Can you walk? Barely, Julie said, wincing as she tried to sit up. They told me Victor sent someone to transfer me tonight. That's his code for disposal. Calvin adjusted her IV and began unhooking the monitors. You'll have to lean on me. Julie smiled faintly. Funny, considering I'm the one who used to hold you up. Before Patrice could answer, Helen's voice crackled through the earpiece Calvin wore. Security's shifting patrols to the south wing. You've got 3 minutes before they double back, Patrice nodded. Then let's move. They slipped out into the hallway, Julie leaning on Calvin's arm. Halfway to the elevator, the fire alarm blared. Teresa's signal. Red lights flashed, sirens screamed, and nurses began ushering patients toward exits. But their luck didn't hold. The 2 guards from outside Julie's room spotted them through the chaos. Hey, stop! Calvin tightened his grip on Julie. Go! They bolted down the corridor, weaving through startled staff. The guards shouted into radios, pushing through the crowd. Helen's voice came again, urgent. North stairwell now. Patrice yanked open the heavy door, holding it as Calvin helped Julie through. The stairs echoed with the pounding of their feet and the distant clamor of alarms. 2 floors down, Helen met them, pistol drawn. Come on, this way! They burst through the exit door onto the rain-soaked loading dock. Ambulances lined the lot, red lights flashing like beacons in the fog. Just as they reached Teresa's car, gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets shattered glass, sparks flying from metal. Helen returned fire, calm and precise. Get in! She shouted. Patrice pushed Julie into the back seat while Calvin jumped behind the wheel. Teresa, soaked and trembling, climbed into the passenger seat. Drive, Calvin, now! The tires screeched against the wet pavement as they sped out of the lot, headlights cutting through the storm. The hospital shrank behind them, sirens wailing in pursuit. They didn't stop until they reached the outskirts of the city, where the streets turned dark and empty. Calvin pulled into an abandoned service station, his hands shaking as he killed the engine. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the sound of rain drumming against the roof filled the silence. Julie leaned back, her voice weak but determined. He knows now. Victor will scorch the earth to find us. Patrice turned to her, eyes fierce. Then we burn brighter. Helen wiped rain from her face, looking out the cracked windshield. Tomorrow morning, the press conference for Westbrook's new acquisition goes live. He'll be there, smiling for the cameras. If we want the world to hear the truth, that's where we do it. Calvin met his mother's gaze. You mean crash his event? Patrice nodded slowly. Not crash it. End it. Julie managed a faint, tired smile. You're braver than I thought, Mrs. Holt. Patrice looked out at the storm. No, I'm just done being afraid. Far across the city, Victor Westbrook stood in his penthouse office, watching the live security feed from Mercy General. The footage showed flickers of motion, gunfire, alarms, chaos, and then nothing. The screen cut to static. He exhaled, calm as ever, and turned to Marcus Fisher. So, he said lightly, they think they've won. Fisher's bandaged arm trembled slightly. They won't get far. Victor smiled thinly. No, they won't, but let them enjoy one more night of hope. Tomorrow, when I stand before every investor in this city, I'll remind them how power truly works. He raised his glass, the skyline reflected in its surface, and by the time the sun sets, the name Patrice Holt will be nothing more than a footnote. Across town, in the rain-drenched service station, Patrice stared into the dark horizon. Lightning flashed, illuminating her son's tired face, Julie's pale features, and Helen's silent determination. Tomorrow, the world would know the truth, or they would all die trying. Morning rose over Atlanta with a heavy sky that threatened more rain. The city felt muted, as if it sensed the storm waiting beneath its calm surface. Inside the abandoned service station, the air was tense but focused. Patrice Holt, Calvin, Helen, Julie, and Dr. Teresa Green moved like pieces on a chessboard, each knowing exactly what their role would be in the final gambit against Victor Westbrook. Helen unrolled a set of blueprints on the hood of Teresa's car. The Westbrook Innovation Center, she said, tapping the schematic. Main auditorium seats 600. Investors, press, board members. Victor's speech starts at 10 sharp. His security detail is split between the stage entrance and the rear corridor leading to the executive lounge. Once he starts talking, half of them will face the audience. That's our window. Calvin rubbed his temples, exhaustion written across his face. It'll take more than a flash drive to bring him down. Even if we release the data, he'll spin it, bury it in legal noise. Julie shook her head. Not this time. The flash drive has his voice memos. Victor recorded himself authorizing the offshore transfers. I decrypted them last night. Once those hit the airwaves, even his allies will abandon him. Patrice stood beside the car, her posture regal despite her bruises. Then we give the world something they can't ignore. We show them the truth in real time. Teresa adjusted her glasses. You're talking about broadcasting live? Patrice nodded. Exactly. Helen, can you access the media feed during his presentation? Helen smirked. Already working on it. One of my contacts handles AV for the event. I slipped him a little incentive. He'll route the main display through my laptop the moment I send the signal. Calvin looked at his mother, worry shadowing his features. You realize once this goes public, Victor won't just come after the company. He'll come after us, all of us. Patrice's gaze was steady. He already did. Now it's our turn. By 9:45, the team was in position. The Westbrook Innovation Center gleamed like glass and steel ambition, banners fluttering in the drizzle. Building tomorrow, today. Sleek cars pulled up to the entrance, releasing Atlanta's elite in tailored suits and polished heels. Inside, the main auditorium buzzed with chatter and flashing cameras. The massive LED screen behind the stage displayed the Westbrook logo, a stylized W glowing white against deep blue. Helen and Teresa sat among the crowd, posing as members of the press. Julie, dressed in a conservative gray suit, moved through the side corridor with a stolen press badge clipped to her lapel. Calvin wore a maintenance uniform, blending with stage crew near the lighting rig. Patrice entered last, her hair pinned up, her dark coat buttoned to the collar. She carried nothing but a small handbag, and the flash drive that could dismantle an empire. At precisely 10 o'clock, Victor Westbrook stepped onto the stage. His smile was perfect, his voice smooth as silk. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks a new era for the Westbrook Group, an era of integrity, innovation, and leadership." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. He stood tall, basking in the glow of his own myth. Patrice watched from the aisle, her pulse steady. She'd once been afraid of this man, afraid of the reach of his power. Not anymore. Helen's quiet voice came through the earpiece. "On your cue, Ms. Holt." Patrice began walking down the central aisle. The murmur of the crowd dimmed as eyes turned toward her. Security at the stage door noticed movement, hands going to their earpieces. Victor saw her then, and for the first time, his mask cracked. "Mrs. Holt," he said, still smiling for the cameras. "What an unexpected surprise." Patrice's voice carried through the hall, calm but commanding. "You tried to kill me, Mr. Westbrook, twice!" A ripple went through the audience, half amusement, half confusion. Victor laughed smoothly. "You must be mistaken. Am I?" Patrice asked, stepping closer to the stage. "Or are you simply afraid the world will finally hear what you've been hiding?" Helen's finger hovered over her keyboard backstage. "Ready," she whispered. Victor's smile faltered. "Security," he said evenly. "Please escort Mrs. Holt out." But before his guards could move, the giant screen behind him flickered. The Westbrook logo vanished, replaced by lines of data, spreadsheets, wire transfers, emails, all bearing his name. Then came the audio. Victor's voice filled the auditorium, projected through the speakers for 600 people to hear. "Transfer the funds to Haven Trust. Move it under Holt's name. If anyone asks, it's consulting compensation. By the time they notice, he'll be in prison and I'll be untouchable." The crowd gasped. Cameras turned from Victor to the screen, capturing everything. He lunged toward the control panel, shouting, "Shut it down!" Helen's voice came over the system, loud and clear. "You can't shut down the truth, Victor," chaos erupted. Journalists stood shouting questions. Investors began pushing toward the exits, their phones raised to record. Victor turned to Patrice, fury blazing behind his composure. "You have no idea what you've done." "Oh, I do," she said. "I've taken back my life, and my son's." As security scrambled to contain the mayhem, Calvin appeared on stage beside her, pulling off his maintenance cap. "You used me to launder your crimes, Victor." "But not anymore." Victor's face twisted in rage. "Ungrateful little." Before he could finish, federal agents flooded the hall, led by Agent Rodriguez, Teresa's contact from the night before. His badge flashed in the lights. "Victor Westbrook, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder." The audience gasped again as Victor's men drew weapons. But within seconds they were disarmed and pinned by agents. Cameras caught every frame. Victor turned to Patrice one last time, his voice low and venomous. "You think this ends me? I built this city." Patrice's reply was ice cold. "Then it's time for a new foundation." The agents led him away in handcuffs as reporters shouted his name. The room pulsed with disbelief, fury, and awe. Julie, pale but standing, made her way down the aisle to join them. "You did it," she whispered. "He's finished." Patrice looked at her son, whose eyes shone with something between exhaustion and pride. "No," she said softly. "We did." Outside, rain began again, gentle and cleansing. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in the puddles like fractured stars. Helen and Teresa stood by the curb, watching as Victor was loaded into a black SUV, his empire collapsing behind him. Calvin exhaled shakily. "It's over." Helen shook her head. "No, honey. It's just finally honest." Patrice tilted her face up to the rain, closing her eyes. The storm had passed, and for the first time in months, she felt the weight lift from her chest. She took Calvin's hand, then Julie's. "Come on," she said quietly. Let's go home. Across the street, hidden beneath an umbrella, a figure watched them disappear into the crowd. Marcus Fisher, his arm still bandaged, his face expressionless. He lifted his phone, spoke a single line, and walked away into the rain. It's done. But you'll want to hear what comes next. 3 weeks later, Atlanta looked different. The skyline hadn't changed, the traffic still snarled at rush hour, and the scent of rain still hung over Peachtree Street after sundown. But something in the air felt lighter, cleaner, as if the whole city had exhaled. The Westbrook Group was in shambles. Investigations spread like wildfire. Every morning, the news ran new footage: handcuffed executives, seized assets, tearful board members pleading ignorance. Federal indictments multiplied, and Victor Westbrook's empire, once polished and untouchable, crumbled under the weight of truth. Inside a modest townhouse on the city's east side, Patrice Holt sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, sipping coffee as dawn painted the horizon pink. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt earned. She heard the door open behind her. Calvin stepped out, his tie loose, his expression calmer than she'd seen in years. "You're up early again," he said, sitting beside her. "Old habits," Patrice replied softly. "I keep expecting someone to knock with bad news." He smiled faintly. "You've got to stop expecting storms after every sunrise." "I lived most of my life waiting for the other shoe to drop," she said. "Now I'm just learning how to stand without flinching." Calvin nodded, watching the sky. "The FBI cleared me completely yesterday. I signed my testimony papers." Patrice turned toward him. "How do you feel?" He gave a small, bitter laugh, like a man who spent years building a tower out of lies and finally watched it fall. But also, free. "You did the right thing," Patrice said gently. "You faced it. That's what matters." He looked down at his hands, then at her. "You should have given up on me a long time ago," she smiled. "Mothers don't give up. We wait until our children find their way home." Later that afternoon, the small living room filled with familiar faces. Helen stood by the window, talking quietly with Dr. Teresa Green, while Julie Bennett, her shoulder still in a sling, sat opposite Patrice with a stack of legal folders beside her. "Victor's already offering deals," Julie said. "He's naming names, trying to bargain for leniency. But he's done. Between the flash drive, your uncle's letters, and the SEC records, the case is airtight." Patrice nodded, her gaze steady. "Then let him rot in the silence he created." Julie smiled faintly. "You've got a future in speeches, you know." Helen chuckled from the corner. "Or politics. God knows Atlanta could use someone with a backbone." Patrice shook her head. "No more battles." "I've had enough for a lifetime." Teresa raised her glass of tea. "Then to peace." They clinked their glasses together, a quiet toast that felt sacred. That evening, when the others had gone, Patrice stepped out onto the porch again. The rain had returned, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. The city lights shimmered through the mist, and the sound of jazz drifted faintly from a neighbor's radio. Calvin joined her once more, holding an envelope. "This came for you," he said. She opened it carefully. Inside was a simple letter on government stationery. "Dear Mrs. Holt, on behalf of the United States Department of Justice, I want to express our gratitude for your bravery and cooperation. Your uncle's evidence and your courage made this investigation possible. Enclosed is documentation confirming the transfer of protected assets from Charles Holt's estate to your name. These funds are now legally yours. Special Agent Rodriguez." She folded the letter slowly, emotion tightening her throat. Calvin looked at her, smiling. "Uncle Charlie left you $23 million. What are you going to do with it now?" Patrice exhaled, her gaze soft on the horizon. "Not hoard it. Money didn't save him, and it almost destroyed us. Maybe I'll start something in his name. A foundation for people who lost everything chasing justice. Something honest." Calvin's eyes glistened. "He'd like that." "I think so too," she said quietly. "And maybe it's time for you to start over too." He nodded. "Julie and I talked. We're leaving Westbrook behind completely. She's opening her own firm. I might teach again, Finance ethics, of all things. Patrice smiled. Teach them what greed looks like before it's too late. He laughed softly. You'd be good at that, too. Maybe, she said. But I think I'll just garden. Watch things grow instead of watching them burn. Far downtown, the news played across every screen. Westbrook pleads guilty to fraud and conspiracy. The image showed Victor being led into a courtroom, expression blank, his empire reduced to ashes, and somewhere far from the cameras, Marcus Fisher sat in a quiet bar, a drink in his hand, his phone buzzing with an encrypted message. He read it, frowned, and then smiled. Phase 2 initiated. Targets expanding beyond Westbrook. He raised his glass to the empty room. And the world keeps turning, he murmured. Back on the porch, Patrice felt the rain cool against her skin. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted. The ghosts had been named, the lies dragged into daylight, and the weight of silence finally broken. She reached for Calvin's hand, squeezed it gently, and whispered, You know what's funny? What? I almost died for money I never wanted, and it ended up giving me everything I needed. He looked at her, confusion giving way to understanding. You mean peace? She nodded. Peace, and my son back. The rain fell steady and soft, washing the past away one drop at a time. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a reminder that storms always return. But now she knew how to stand through them. And for the first time since the inheritance that changed everything, Patrice Holt smiled without fear.